Hi guys, welcome back to Wentworth Life, the YouTube channel that talks all things Wentworth. If you're new to the channel, then hit that subscribe button right now for all future video updates, and if you stick around until the end of the video, I will be responding to some of your comments from one of my previous videos. Okay, so we are going to be taking another trip down memory lane with Season 5. Now, a lot of people called Season 5 the Ferguson Show, which I kind of agree with after making this list. But call it what you want, Season 5 had some amazing moments. So let's get started with the top 10 Wentworth Season 5 moments. Starting us off at number 10, we have Sonia's story revealed. So, up until now, none of us really knew if Sonia was guilty or not, but everything was revealed in this episode. So Sonia had all her charges dropped and was back living the high life, and in a flashback moment, we discover that Sonia did indeed kill her friend Helen. And in another later scene, we learned that Detective Kaplan had been working with Sonia the whole time. So basically with this story, Sonia killed her friend Helen, she telephoned Don Kaplan for help and made him a deal. That basically, if he helps her get her charges dropped in court, then she will pay him a load of money. And everything seemed to be going perfectly. However, Don wanted one more thing from Sonia. He wanted to know what happened to her husband, who mysteriously disappeared years and years ago. So Sonia doesn't seem really happy giving out this information, but in a later scene, when Don comes over to her apartment to celebrate, Sonia gives him some wine and decides to show him what she did with her husband. So things start getting a bit dark then when Sonia drives Don down a secluded dark road. He starts to feel a little bit sleepy, so alarm bells, Sonia has spiked his drink. When he finally does fall asleep and Sonia gets to a lake, it's looking like she's got murderous plans for Don. She opens up her boot to get out some tools, but then Don wakes up and smashes Sonia over the head. Now, when Sonia eventually wakes up, Don and the car are missing, so Sonia spends the night running home before eventually stopping a passerby. And by the time Sonia gets home, it's already sunrise, and discovers that Don has taken his money and does a runner. Sonia realizes that he has probably dobbed her into the police and tries to make a run for it. She runs upstairs to pack all her things and grabs her passport, but it's too late. The police arrive just as she's about to make a run for it, and she is headed straight back for Wentworth. Coming in at number 9, we have Ferguson fights the women in the yard. Now, this was a huge fight scene. I don't think any of us were expecting this, but basically Ferguson had killed B, and instead of getting out of prison as she originally planned, she was back in H Block. All of the women wanted revenge, but Kaz told the women to treat Ferguson like she's invisible, she's a ghost. But this doesn't stop Ali in a later scene in the yard. When Ferguson comes back into general, Ali can't help herself and goes to attack Joan with a snooker ball in a sock. Joan is way too fast for Ali and just ends up throwing Ali to the floor like a rag doll. It then does look like that Ferguson is about to lose her shit, but she just ends up throwing away the sock and the snooker ball. She then goes to walk away and Ali attacks again, but doesn't get very far when Ferguson just punches her to the floor. Then a load of the women jump into the fight, and it's absolutely epic. There are punches flying everywhere, blood flying everywhere, but Ferguson is literally beating the crap out of everyone. She even ends up snapping a prisoner's arm while beating the crap into another, punching and punching in her face over and over again. Ali then has one last try and goes for Ferguson, but Ferguson grabs Ali by the neck and lifts her up into the air, a little bit like that time when Ferguson strangled Jess in Season 3, and then Ferguson ends up headbutting Ali to the ground. She then turns around and just screams out, "Who's next?" before letting out a huge snarl. Now, apart from the Rita versus Drago fight in Season 6, I think this is the only other biggest fight scene in Wentworth. I mean, can you imagine now when it comes down to Rita versus Joan in the final chapter next year? It's going to be insane. Flying in at number 8, Ferguson murders Iman. So there's going to be a lot of Ferguson talk in this video, just to warn you, so bear with me. But in this scene, it is revealed that Iman is after Frankie. Frankie had basically been framed for Mike Panisi's murder by Iman, and Iman then got herself into Wentworth as a prisoner to kill Frankie. And this leads us on to this next showdown. So, when Frankie realises who Iman really is, the pair of them end up having a massive struggle in the unit, and Iman is determined to kill Frankie. And at one point, it's looking like that Frankie is about to meet her maker, but then all of a sudden, black leather gloves appear, and Ferguson saves Frankie by grabbing Iman off her. All seems well, and Frankie even has a smile on her face, and she's telling Ferguson that it was Iman who killed Mike. And then Ferguson tells Frankie, yes, I heard, she can tell them it wasn't you. And Frankie nods away, and then Ferguson says, but she won't be telling them anything, and then snaps Iman's neck right in front of Frankie, killing her instantly. Iman's dead body lays on the floor, and Frankie is in shock. This was such a cruel moment for Frankie. I remember screaming at the TV at Ferguson because Ferguson literally just ruined Frankie's final chance of having her charges dropped. Bloody Ferguson. Coming in at number 7, we have Liz has a breakdown. Oh, poor Liz. So things were really starting to get to Liz this season, and I do think this could have been the start of her early onset dementia that gets discovered later on in season 6. But basically, Sonia had been toying and mentally torturing Liz all season, and it got way too much for her. Sonia ends up telling Boomer that Liz was witness X in order to try and ruin their friendship, and of course Boomer hates laggers, so she goes to the shower block where Liz is and has a proper go at her, and Liz can't take any more. She ends up having a complete breakdown in front of Boomer, screaming, crying, pulling her hair out before falling to the floor. It really wasn't a very nice scene to watch for our favourite Liz. Coming in at number 6, we have Mike Panisi attacks Frankie. So this is where it all began for Frankie in Season 5, Episode 1. Frankie bumps into Mike Panisi while she's out ordering a coffee. Now, Mike Panisi was the guy who Frankie had originally attacked all those years ago on the reality TV show, and threw hot oil over him. Now, Mike wants to sit down and have a chat with Frankie, but Frankie tells him that she can't, it's a breach of her parole. But she ends up sitting down with him anyway. Mike then starts to ring Frankie, asking to meet her again, and she says no, and he eventually starts to get abusive towards her, and basically threatening to destroy her. And we find out that Mike Panisi has a weirdly human-sized Frankie doll in his house, having dinner with him at the dinner table. And this Frankie doll has a very, very badly burnt face. So, in a later scene, Frankie decides to go over to Mike's house to talk some sense into him. But while she's sitting in her car, he jumps in and attacks her with a blowtorch. He tries to burn her face off, but she manages to fight him and throw him out of her car, and she manages to get away. Unfortunately for Frankie, she later ends up getting arrested for his murder. At the halfway mark now, and we have You've Licked Your Last Pussy. Now, this was an episode that showed us just how brutal this show can be, and how much further the writers are willing to push more and more boundaries. And so basically there was no love lost between Juicy Lucy and Ferguson. And during the episode, Juicy Lucy ends up having a dentist appointment because she ends up cracking or hurting a tooth or something. So while Lucy is sat down with her gas in there, Nurse Radcliffe goes to get the dentist. But the dentist that actually arrives is Ferguson in disguise. All gloved up and with a mask on, Ferguson ups Juice's gas and sends her into La La Land, and she ends up jumping on top of her and delivers one of the most brilliant quotes of the whole show. You've licked your last pussy. And I think just about all of us gasped after hearing that line because we all knew what was about to happen. Ferguson gets a blade and cuts off Juicy's tongue. And in a later scene, after Juice wakes up, Juicy then runs to the yard where everyone is, covered in a lot of blood that's oozing out of her mouth, runs at Vera and collapses on her chest, not before spitting a load of gunky blood all over her. Probably one of the most gruesome scenes to ever happen on Wentworth. And by all accounts, Robbie, who plays Will Jackson, he ended up running off set to throw up after filming this scene. I would have loved to have seen that as a blooper. Coming in at number 4, we have the brawler crash. Now, things between Mr. Jackson and CRAIGz were not good. In fact, they just couldn't understand each other. Even though they were both more or less on the same team, they wanted the same things, but CRAIGz had issues with men, and she couldn't warm to Mr. Jackson. Now, during a scene where CRAIGz is being taken to court, one of the wheels ends up coming off the brawler, and the brawler ends up rolling into a lake, with CRAIGz trapped in the back while she's handcuffed. Now, Will manages to get out and gets his colleague to safety, but then he has to swim back to save CRAIGz. Now, at this stage, the whole van is nearly underwater. So, Mr. Jackson eventually manages to break into the back of the brawler, but CRAIGz has broken her arm. He manages to calm CRAIGz down and gets her to swim out the window. But when Mr. Jackson tries to swim through after her, his belt gets caught on the window. Now, CRAIGz gets to shore and realizes that Mr. Jackson isn't behind her, and she's screaming out his name. But Will is trapped underwater. And I think we all held our breath during this scene, but eventually Will manages to break free and gets back above water. Now, what I loved most about this scene was the fact that CRAIGz totally ended up changing her opinion of Mr. Jackson, and the two of them, they ended up bonding and ended up helping each other to make the prison, or try to make the prison, a better place. Okay, at number 3, we have Ferguson becomes top dog. Now, this was only a very short scene, but it's a scene that sticks in my mind. And so after Ferguson had chopped off Juicy Lucy's tongue, Ferguson somehow managed to gain the respect of the women. Well, the women that weren't on CRAIGz's crew. And I think the women were impressed that Ferguson wasn't afraid to teach Juicy Lucy a lesson, because Juice and her crew, they'd gone around hurting a lot of the women over the last couple of seasons. So Tina and the girls, they start chanting top dog at Ferguson, and the rest of the women start joining in, but CRAIGz and her crew, they're looking on in disbelief. And what makes this scene so amazing is the music that they used in the background, which I'm sure a lot of you will recognise because it's the same music that they used at the very end of the season 8 final moment. Okay, just missing out on the top spot at number 2, we have Ferguson is buried alive. So, season 5 had pretty much become the Ferguson show, and the writers had used her character quite heavily this season. But if they knew all along that by the end of season 5 that they were going to be burying Ferguson alive, then I can understand why they would want to use as much of her as they possibly could before she left the show. So anyway, Ferguson had managed to switch places with Ali during the Great Escape at the end of season 5, but it was all a setup to get rid of Ferguson once and for all. And the box that Ferguson was hiding in was placed in a shallow grave, and someone was starting to bury her alive. Now Ferguson starts to scream out to tell this person that she's in there, but it's too late. The box is buried, and when the mysterious person walks back into the car, it's revealed that it's Mr. Jackson who's just done the deed. Ferguson looks up at the box and she sees a photo of B, and the penny drops for Ferguson, and Ferguson ends up letting out an almighty final scream just before season 5 comes to a close. And coming in at number 1, we have the kangaroo court goes wrong. So for me, this was my favourite moment from season 5. In fact, I think it might actually be in my top 5 best ever moments of the whole of Wentworth. But that's a video for another day. But basically, Ferguson is taken hostage by the women. I think it was season 5 episode 11, and along with Linda Miles, she was also taken hostage, and Ferguson is put on trial by the women for all the crimes that she has committed. So the officers are forced out of the yard while the women have Miss Miles, and Frankie tells the women everything that Ferguson has done while Ferguson is tied to the basketball. And Ferguson ends up then having her say, and she ends up losing it then, and basically starts telling all the women that they are all animals and children and stupid. So the women end up turning on Ferguson, including Tina and those lot. So CRAIGZ ends up holding a vote, and it basically says, who wants Ferguson for top dog? And all the women, they start chanting guilty, guilty, and the women dethrone Ferguson. So job done. Or at least that's what CRAIGZ thinks. CRAIGZ then tells the women the meeting is over, but someone then throws a rope over to the women that lands right at Ferguson's feet. The women then decide to hang Ferguson, despite CRAIGZ telling the women to stop. This was just such a messed up moment, because the officers were watching, but they couldn't do anything because Channing had ordered them to do nothing. The officers, including Jake and Vera, were basically standing there watching a murder take place. So the women then start to hang Ferguson, and Vera decides she has to stop this. She ends up running into the yard and tells the women to drop the shiv, but when the women threaten to cut Linda's throat, Vera reminds the prisoner that, you know, do you want 2 months or do you want 20 years? And eventually the prisoner ends up dropping the shiv, and Vera runs up and cuts the rope. So Ferguson falls back to the floor and is pretty much dead at this point, but Vera, being the good officer that she is, she starts doing CPR on Ferguson, and Ferguson then eventually opens her eyes. And oh guys, it was such a great moment. It was the moment that we were all waiting for. We wanted Ferguson to get some of her just desserts, especially after what happened with B. And do you know what? I think this actually would have made a better cliffhanger than the Ferguson being buried alive moment, if you want my honest opinion. This should have been the final episode of season 5, of Ferguson getting hanged, Vera cutting the rope, and then it should have ended with Vera doing CPR, and we would have had to have waited till the next year to find out whether Ferguson survived or not. That's how I think it should have finished, but hey ho, we got what we got. But for me, this was just the best scene ever. So anyway guys, that was the top 10 moments from season 5. Did you guys enjoy the trip down memory lane? What was your favourite moment from season 5? You can only pick one. Was there anything that I left out? Let me know in the comments box below. Alright guys, and on that note, it's now time for some comment replies. So we have J. Armix. Great, so season 9 will be the last season, I hear. Season 8 was very dull, I thought. Oh, sorry you felt that way. It was definitely a building season, but I don't think it was dull. But yes, season 9 next year is the final chapter for Wentworth. Thank you for your comment. And we have Keely Bannister. There was never going to be any other number 1 other than the Rita Drago showdown epic scene. Yes, Keely. We haven't had a fight scene top that yet, but I do think something will top it in the final chapter. We'll just have to wait and see, but thank you for your comment. And we have BlueKnot.sus. Hey Wentworth Life, I have a question. What is your favourite so far? But for some reason, Lou Kelly reminds me of B, even though she looks nothing like B except from the hair. But the reason why I saw this is because when Lou Kelly was going into the showers in the season finale, and in season 2 episode 11 when B escapes the hospital, B was wearing a hat, so that reminded me of B. Reason 2. In the first episode of season 8, when Lou attacks Boomer in the shower, Lou says, "What is that like knowing you're about to die?" And B almost said the exact same thing when Ferguson kills B, like saying what it's like, you know, when you're going to die. But that's all the reasons why Lou reminds me of B. But have a good day, I enjoy watching your videos. Thank you for your comment, and I have to agree, Lou Kelly does remind me of B. Nothing to do with the characteristics at all. I just feel like every so often, I think with the hair, she just reminds me of B. But again, it's got nothing to do with the characteristics, so I'm totally with you on that one, definitely. So thank you for your comment. And thank you all once again for your amazing comments. Keep them coming. I love hearing your thoughts, and maybe next time one of your comments will feature in one of my new videos. Okay guys, so thank you all for watching. If you've made it this far into the video, make sure you smash that subscribe button, and I will see you all again very soon.